You think they deserve to know who you really are, my brother said, holding his phone up like a weapon. The room went completely still. My boss leaned forward. My coworkers stared. Then he pressed play. My own voice filled the conference room. Shaky, raw, desperate. A private recording I had made years ago during the worst period of my life. I didn't think I'd survive that year. Whispers. Eyes darting everywhere but toward me. My chest felt hollow. My hands were shaking under the table. I thought your company should know who they just promoted, my brother Damon said, perfectly calm. Like he had rehearsed every word 100 times. Something inside me broke open in that moment. My name is Alina Voss. And in less than 3 minutes, my brother did not just humiliate me in front of everyone I had worked so hard to impress. He tried to undo every painful thing I had ever rebuilt about myself. Nobody said a word after Damon walked out. Not my boss. Not my colleagues. Not even Patricia from marketing, who always had something to say about everything. The promotion meeting ended early without explanation. People gathered their notebooks and folders and left the room without looking at me. I walked to my desk slowly, like someone moving through water. By the time I sat down, an email notification had already appeared on my screen. It was from HR. Subject line: let's find a time to connect. 3 words that felt like a door quietly closing in my face. Damon had walked into my workplace, dropped a grenade into the middle of my career, and left without a scratch on him. No one stopped him. No one questioned what he was doing there. No one asked me for my side of the story. They simply stepped back. And I was left standing in the smoke he created. That recording was not just embarrassing. It was sacred to me. I had made it during therapy. During the year everything fell apart. The year I lost my job, my apartment, and nearly my will to keep going. My therapist had encouraged me to record some sessions so I could listen back when I needed to remember I was making real progress. Once, during a quiet evening at my parents' house, I had shared a small piece of that recording with Damon. I was tired of pretending I was fine. I thought if I let him in, he would finally see me as more than just competition. He had nodded. He had said the right things. But he had never deleted it. He had saved it carefully, filed it somewhere safe, and waited for exactly the right moment to use it against me. That night, I finally understood what my brother really was. My mother called before I even got home. She did not ask how I was. She did not say she was sorry. The first thing out of her mouth was, "Why would you keep something like that from your employer, Alina?" My father said nothing. Just breathed slowly through the phone the way he always did when he was disappointed, but did not want to say it directly. Damon had already called them. Of course he had. He was always 3 steps ahead when it came to controlling the story. By the time I spoke, the version my family had received was already settled in their minds. Alina had hidden something dark. Alina had embarrassed everyone. Alina was the problem. I said goodbye quietly and hung up. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment for a long time after that, just trying to remember how to breathe normally. This was not the first time. Growing up, Damon had always been the one who shaped how people saw things. If something went wrong between us, he had a way of spinning it until I was the one who looked unreasonable. Until I was the one who ended up apologizing. He broke my science project in 7th grade. Cried. He told our parents I had knocked it over myself and then blamed him to avoid trouble. They believed him. He missed my university graduation because he had something important to do. When relatives asked, somehow the story became that I had given him the wrong date. Small things. Constant things. I had always told myself it was just sibling rivalry. That he did not really mean harm. But this was not small anymore. This was my career. This was my reputation. This was the life I had worked through pain and therapy and sleepless years to build. HR scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. The woman across the table, Ms. Farrow, had kind eyes but a very careful voice. She used words like optics and perception and team morale. She said the company valued my contributions and wanted to support me through this difficult period. Then she said the promotion had been paused. Not cancelled. Not revoked. She said it gently, like the softer word made it something different. But paused still meant I was being penalized. Paused still meant that Damon had walked into my office, played a recording from the most broken moment of my life, and the consequence had landed entirely on me. I thanked her for her time, gathered my things. I walked into the bathroom and stood at the sink for several minutes, staring at the water running over my hands. Then I washed my face and went back to work. A week later, I found out the real reason Damon had done it. My colleague Britt mentioned it during lunch, not realizing she was handing me the missing piece of the entire puzzle. She had seen the internal applications list before the promotion was announced. Damon had applied for the same role. He had gone through the full process, submitted his resume, completed the interview rounds, and waited. The offer had gone to me instead. I set my fork down very carefully. Everything rearranged itself in my mind. The timing of his visit. The way he had walked in immediately after the announcement. The practiced calm in his voice. This was not about protecting anyone from the truth about my mental health history. This was about destroying something I had fairly earned. He could not have the promotion, so he had decided I should not have it either. The family group chat became unbearable. Messages arrived from aunts, cousins, and distant relatives I barely spoke to during ordinary times. Everyone was concerned. Everyone was sympathetic. But not for me. The concern was for Damon. For how difficult it must have been for him to carry the weight of my struggles all these years. For how he had always tried to look after me. For how I had apparently been pushing him away. He had completely rewritten the story. In his version, he had gone to my workplace out of love. Out of genuine worry. Because he feared I was not stable enough to handle the pressure of a new role. The family had accepted this version without hearing a single word from me. I watched the messages come in and did not reply to one of them. Some battles cannot be won in a group chat. I understood that clearly. That night I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch. I had been in this exact position before years ago during the bad year. The year the recording was made. Back then I had sat on that same floor because I did not have the strength to stand up. This time felt different. The grief was still there. The humiliation was still there. But underneath all of it, something harder had settled in my chest. Something cold and focused. I was done crying over what Damon had done. I was done waiting for my family to choose my side. I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided what they believed. For the first time since the conference room, I stopped reacting to everything he had set in motion. And I started thinking, because if Damon was willing to dig into my past to destroy me, then I needed to understand exactly who he was and what he had been hiding. 4 days after everything happened, a message arrived from a woman named Petra. We had gone to university together. We were friendly but not close. She had known Damon briefly through a shared study group years ago, when we were all much younger. Her message was short. Alina, I heard what happened. I want you to know your brother is not who people think he is. I don't know if it matters right now, but I thought you should hear it from someone. I read it 3 times. I had spent years believing Damon was simply difficult. That his need to control narratives was a flaw he could not help. That deep down, underneath everything, he was still my brother. But Petra's message cracked something open. If someone outside my family could see a pattern, then what I had always noticed about him was not just my imagination. Damon had a past, and it was still hidden. I made a deliberate decision. I stopped defending myself publicly. No more long messages to relatives. No more emotional phone calls trying to explain the context of the recording. No more exhausting conversations with people who had already chosen what they wanted to believe. Instead, I started paying very close attention. When people think you have already lost, they stop being careful around you. Damon was no exception to this. He started showing up to family dinners with more ease than usual. He spoke about integrity and loyalty. He used words that sounded impressive in rooms full of people who were not listening closely enough. But I was listening. And the more he talked, the more I noticed what he avoided. Certain topics. Certain years. Certain names that made his expression shift for just a fraction of a second before he smoothly changed the subject. I began writing everything down. A man named Owen reached out through a mutual professional connection. He had worked at Damon's previous company, a mid-sized supply firm where Damon had spent 3 years before moving on. Owen had seen my name connected to the promotion incident and, after some hesitation, decided to contact me. He did not make direct accusations. He said there had been questions during the final months of Damon's time there, that certain numbers had not lined up correctly, that a quiet internal review had been started, that Damon had left the company before the review reached any firm conclusion. He said he could not prove anything on his own, but he thought I deserved to know what had been quietly discussed. I thanked him genuinely. I asked if he would be willing to speak further if I had specific questions later. He said yes. I saved his contact and closed my laptop carefully, the way you handle something that might matter enormously. I almost missed it entirely. Months before any of this had happened, Damon had borrowed my laptop for an afternoon while his own was being repaired. He had used it to check emails and access something work-related. I had thought nothing of it at the time. But sitting in my apartment one evening going through old folders, I opened my browser history out of habit. His email account had been logged in through my browser. He had signed out, but the session had not cleared completely. A fragment remained. Not enough to access full emails, but enough to see subject lines, sender names, and partial previews from that period. I sat very still. My hands were not shaking this time. I pulled up every fragment I could recover and began reading slowly and carefully. The way you read something you already sense might change everything. I was right. The fragments were not dramatic individually. Invoice queries. A transfer to an unfamiliar account name. Emails about adjusting figures in a quarterly report. A message from someone at Damon's former company asking him to clarify a discrepancy before it went any further. Taken alone, each piece meant very little. But taken together across several months, they told a quiet story. A careful story about a man who had been managing numbers in a way that benefited himself and covering his tracks just well enough to stay ahead of scrutiny. I saved every fragment I could recover. Then I called Owen again and gave him specific dates and subject line details. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Those are exactly the months I was talking about." Something settled in my chest at those words. Not excitement, not anger, just clarity. The kind that comes when pieces finally stop floating separately and lock into place. The more I uncovered, the clearer Damon's real situation became. He had not left his previous company simply to pursue a better opportunity. He had left because the ground beneath him was beginning to shift. The internal review Owen had mentioned was moving toward conclusions Damon could not explain his way out of. He had needed a fresh start. Clean record at a new company. A new audience with no knowledge of his history. And then I had been promoted into the exact role he had been hoping would give him that fresh start. That was what had made him dangerous on the day of the conference room. It was not simply jealousy. It was panic. He needed me removed from that position quickly, before anyone started running the kind of background checks that might link his previous role to his new one. My humiliation had been urgent to him. That realization made everything much worse. Second message arrived. It came through an old professional contact form I had not updated in years. It was anonymous. No name, no identifying details. He did the same thing to me. Used something personal I shared with him to get ahead. "If you're building something, I want to help." No name. No way to verify who it was. But it told me something deeply important. Damon had not done this only to me. I was not a special case. I was not the victim of a brother who had experienced one terrible moment of poor judgment. I was one entry in a pattern. He had used people before. People who trusted him, opened up to him, shared things with him in moments of honesty. And when those things became useful, he had not hesitated. I wrote back asking for anything they felt comfortable sharing. Then I kept building my file. I did not rush. I spent the next 2 weeks doing nothing loud. No confrontations. No accusations. No calls to relatives asking them to reconsider the story Damon had told them. I compiled everything carefully into a single folder. The email fragments from my browser session. My conversations with Owen. Dates, amounts, account names, and the timeline of the quarterly report discrepancies. Every piece placed deliberately alongside the next. I also kept a separate document. A plain, factual record of everything Damon had done since the conference room. The family messages. My mother's reaction. The HR meeting. All of it logged without emotional language. Not because I planned to show anyone everything, but because I needed to fully understand the shape of what I was dealing with. When you are preparing to tell the truth about someone who is very skilled at lying, the truth must be organized. Must be clear. It must be impossible to argue away. I was not ready yet, but I was close. Damon had started to relax completely. I could see it in the way he moved through family spaces. He came to Sunday dinner with his shoulders loose and his voice easy. He brought wine. He told funny stories. He shook hands and filled silences and made sure people noticed him without seeming to try. At one point during the meal he looked directly across the table at me and smiled. It was the smile of someone who believed the story was already finished and his version had survived. He talked about integrity that evening. About how true character revealed itself during difficult moments. About how important it was to be honest with the people around you. I watched my mother nod. I watched my father agree. I kept my face completely still and my voice completely even throughout the meal. Because Damon loved an audience. And I was about to give him the largest one he had ever faced. The final piece came through Owen. He had gone back through records he had quietly kept from his years at the firm. Documents saved out of professional habit, not knowing they would ever matter beyond that job. Among them was a signed quarterly financial report that Damon had authored and approved during his final year at the company. Beside it was the original data set the report was supposed to accurately reflect. The numbers were different. Not slightly different. Not the kind of difference that came from rounding or estimation. The changes were specific, consistent, and carefully placed in areas that would be difficult to notice without the original data for direct comparison. Owen sent me a scanned copy. I printed it and laid it on my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. This was not a fragment requiring interpretation. This was a signed document, dated, wrong in a way that could not be explained away as an honest mistake. It was proof. I sat with that document for 3 full days before deciding what to do. Part of me wanted to take it immediately to someone official, a lawyer, a regulatory body, someone with authority. But I had studied Damon carefully enough by now to understand that moving too fast left gaps. And gaps became the excuses that skilled people use to escape consequences. I did not want revenge that could be argued against. I wanted truth that could not be undone. So I thought carefully about what I actually needed. My promotion restored. My reputation returned. The people who had judged me in that conference room, and in my family, to understand clearly what had actually happened and why. I did not need to destroy Damon. I simply needed to stop protecting his lies. Because every time I had stayed quiet, every time I had absorbed his behavior and moved forward without speaking, I had been holding up the very story he needed people to believe. That was ending. Our family held a gathering the following Saturday. It was a birthday celebration for my aunt, a warm, generous woman who had always been genuinely kind to me. After the conference room incident, she had sent me a private message that simply said, "I know you, Alina. I believe in you." Those 6 words had meant more than she probably realized. The gathering was large. Relatives, neighbors, and several of Damon's professional contacts who had grown friendly with our family over the years. Damon loved events like this. He arrived early, helped arrange seating, laughed loudly, and made sure everyone noticed his presence without appearing to seek it. I arrived quietly. I greeted my aunt warmly. I helped in the kitchen. I spoke to people I cared about and said nothing about the past weeks. I waited. Damon caught my eye once across the room and smiled easily. He was still not expecting anything. That was exactly what I needed. By 8 o'clock the room had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a family evening. Damon was near the fireplace, telling a work story to a small group that included 2 of his professional contacts. People were laughing at the right moments. He was comfortable and confident and in complete control of the room. I stood up. Not dramatically. Not loudly. I simply rose from my chair, held my folder lightly in both hands, and waited for a natural pause in the conversation near me. Came within seconds. Damon noticed me standing first. His smile shifted, barely, just slightly, a small flicker moving through him before he recovered and held his expression steady. "I'd like to talk about something briefly, if everyone is comfortable with that," I said. My voice was completely calm. The kind of calm that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from having prepared so thoroughly that your feelings cannot run ahead of your thoughts. Damon said nothing. The room waited. I did not raise my voice once. I laid out the facts the way a teacher might explain something important, clearly, in order, without drama. No accusations disguised as questions. No long emotional speeches. No pauses designed for effect. Just the truth placed carefully in sequence. I explained the conference room and what had happened there. I explained the recording and where it had come from, a private conversation between siblings during my most vulnerable year. I explained that Damon had applied for the same promotion and had not received the offer. Then I presented the quarterly report alongside the original data. I explained the discrepancy calmly and walked through the timeline Owen had helped me piece together. I showed the email fragments and what they suggested. I stated clearly that I could provide Owen's contact information to anyone who wished to verify what I had shared. Throughout all of it, I spoke quietly. Because the truth does not need volume. It only needs to be clear enough that no one in the room can honestly claim they did not understand it. For the first time in his life, Damon had nothing to say. I watched it happen across his face, the shift from confidence to calculation to something I had genuinely never seen in him before. Not quite shame. Not quite fear. Something sitting heavily between the two, with nowhere to go. He opened his mouth once. Then closed it. One of his professional contacts stepped quietly away from him without making a scene of it. Then another did the same. My mother was very still. My father looked at the table. Nobody argued with what I had presented. Nobody stepped forward to defend him. The documents were in the room. The timeline was on the table. The story existed on its own now without needing me to keep explaining it. The way people stepped back from Damon in that moment was identical to the way they had stepped back from me in the conference room weeks earlier. Except this time it was not built on a recording from someone's darkest year. This time it was built on what a person had deliberately chosen to do. I drove home alone that night. I did not feel the sharp rush of triumph I might have imagined during all those weeks of quiet preparation. What settled over me instead was softer and much more lasting than triumph. A deep, steady sense of something finally being placed where it belonged. The next morning, an email arrived from Ms. Farrow in HR. After reviewing recent developments, the promotion was being reinstated with immediate effect. She expressed regret for the disruption and hoped I understood that the company had needed to proceed carefully given the circumstances at the time. I read it twice. Then I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window and watched the morning light come in slowly. I had not set out to destroy Damon. I had not wanted to ruin him publicly or take something from him the way he had tried to take from me. I had simply stopped covering for him. Stopped absorbing the weight of his choices so he never had to face them himself. In the end, I did not save my career by fighting loudly or performing strength I did not feel. I saved it by finally refusing to stay quiet about what was true.